These are busy times at Ocean State Job Lot with Christmas and winter upon us, and many of our customers know that they can get quality items at low prices, like men's and ladies' merino wool socks for $3.99, official New England Patriots championship t-shirts or licensed hats, $10 each, and Patriots hooded sweatshirts for $25. Our men's and ladies' Sherpa jackets are terrific for $15, and men's memory foam slippers are $10, women's $8. It's a great week to shop at Ocean State Job Lot.
Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
I'm reading this book by Mike Monterio called Ruined by Design. In this book, Mike, few years ago, gave a talk which said designers have a huge responsibility and if not done correctly, they should be jailed. A lot of people that time must have said this is too much, but seems like he was right. Few years later, Oliver Smits from Volkswagen was jailed for 7 years to design a software to circumvent US emission test and let nearly 6 lakh diesel vehicles bypass the pollution test. It was a crime attributed to design. Today, being a more aware designer, at least of the online product world, I believe it's our responsibility to question what we are building and how is it going to impact our users. On that note, I have decided to take a small but significant step: fonts. We use them so casually from a simple drop-down. Have you ever given a thought who are making these fonts? Am I using the right license version? Why should I pay for a font which I like? I don't know why I like it, but I like it. Today I have Tanya George with us on AudioGyan. Tanya is an Indian typographer, a type designer. She did her MA in Typeface design from University of Reading. She works in the area of graphic communication and identity design. She also teaches typography as a visiting faculty at ISDI and Pearl Academy. Along with that, she also conducts TypeWalks in Mumbai. So thank you, Tanya, for giving your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on AudioGyan.
Likewise, Kedar. I'm so happy you reached out.
As I said about the Mike Monterio book, and it was really an eye-opening. And on the same lines, I think I was also reading about Massimo Vignelli and a bunch of other typographers who have a very strong opinion on font, how they should be used, what like a person can live with like half a dozen fonts for his entire life. So on those lines, I've come up with few questions, and mainly to understand the landscape of fonts and what you have learned and what kind of evangelizing of fonts and their use you have. So if you can start with a brief history of fonts, their origin, story behind how like fonts behave today, how were they used before, and some background about it.
Right. So for about at least 500 years, fonts used to be a physical object. It was something that was cast in metal, and you could hold these pieces, and that's where metal typesetting comes from, where you'd have these letterpress machines where you'd sort of place letters one next to another and space them manually.
Okay. I think this was in 1460s or something, right? It started?
Yeah, I mean, Gutenberg's attributed as one of the fathers of typesetting, of printing letter forms, essentially, in the Western canon. There is debates as to how it also happened far more earlier in the East. But that's not important for this conversation. But the point is, somewhere from the 1500s onwards, type was used in a metal form, essentially. And back then, because you could hold it, buying and selling meant, selling an object. You would in fact sell fonts by weight. You would, because it just made sense, because it had width and dimension to it. And that was the most logical way that made sense to sell fonts. But today, fonts have dematerialized. It's no longer something that you can hold and feel and, sort of weigh anymore. It's made up of binary code, and it's software in some ways. Yeah. Again, this is a debate that's out there amongst designers. Do you call font a software or can it be called a plugin? And that's also another conversation to be had. But today, because fonts are dematerialized, the font file that you have on your system consists of the font and style name, it consists of the outline of the drawing of those letters. So each of those glyphs are drawn individually. Each of those shapes that you type out, someone sat and drawn each and every one of them. So it contains information about that outline. It contains information about spacing and kerning values. Feature code is there, as well as the license to use it. So all of these pieces of information are there in the font file that you'll download from wherever, whether it's legally or illegally. Usually all the legal methods that you'll download it will have all of this properly coded into that file, and once you install it, it works well on your system.
Got it.
If you've downloaded from sites that are questionable, probably you're going to have some characters missing. Probably you're going to have spacing values very off.
Or sometimes if you add have F and T together, then they seem corrupted.
Yeah, the ligatures don't work. In fact, one of the most popular issues is, they will either have only uppercase letters or they will have uppercase and lowercase, and numerals are very strange and don't look like they're part of that design. So that's a price you pay for not having paid for what you're downloading. And this idea of, because it's dematerialized, it sort of is commercialized in a way software is, and in a way music is. So that's a very common analogy that one tends to make between music and fonts these days. Because just like music, you don't really buy the font. Though people talk about buying fonts, you buy the license to use the font. And this is similar in music as well. You buy the license to listen to that piece of music on a particular device. So similarly, you buy the license to use the font. The rights of the font are still with the designer, whoever created it. The outlines are still their intellectual property, essentially, unless, of course, you buy the license to buy that of them as well. So there are those allowances made as well.
But these typically foundries would do. They would buy out some font.
Yeah, that foundries, mostly larger companies who want to buy out the whole thing completely. And there's a much larger premium on those kinds of licenses because you're buying someone's complete IP. They can't do anything with it in the future. There is nothing that they can do with those outlines anymore. They can't sell it to anyone else. So they will basically... this will be the one source of income from that particular design. So,
sure. And speaking about foundries, if you can also highlight what is a foundry, because again, that word is derived from that metal casting part. So if you
back then it was this place where you had people sort of pouring different antimony and tin and all of these different metals, and you'd sort of cast type with them, but that's no longer the case. There's no heated furnace working anywhere. It's mostly in front of computers these days. A foundry can be a lot of different things. A foundry could be one person because you don't need too many people to design a font. One person could do the whole job themselves. Usually they'll sort of either hire or collaborate with different people who are better at different aspects of font making. So a foundry could be one person. A foundry could be 4 or 5 people. And that's usually an individual model where it's just, a couple of people or one person. And the kind of fonts you'll get are not as many as you would get in a foundry that is sort of representing multiple type designers. So there are different models for this as well. And then there is another aspect of there being marketplaces to sell these fonts. So, for example, you have...
My Fonts.
My Fonts is a marketplace. Creative Market, right? Creative Market is another marketplace where you can sort of buy and sell fonts. So you can also put up your work. Creative Market also allows for other things such as illustrations and vectors and all of that. But fonts are also part of Creative Market ecosystem.
And then Monotype is a foundry where they have multiple designers.
Monotype is something completely a foundry is just one part of what Monotype does. So Monotype's far bigger than just a foundry.
So Indian example, Type is a foundry.
Correct. Type is a foundry, and there are a bunch of designers over there. They all the fonts that they release are from Type itself. But you have ITF, which is another Indian foundry. They have designs by different designers. That they credit different designers that have designed the font. So you can have that kind of crediting system as well. There is an international foundry called Type Together, which again you have multiple people sort of retailing their fonts through that foundry. So not everything is designed by the people working for that foundry. There are also people who sort of use Type Together as a place to distribute their fonts. It just becomes a bit more easier and streamlined in that manner. That's not to say smaller independent foundries are not a good idea, because they also offer a good quality product. It's just that their offerings might be limited in terms of the kind of varieties that they have to offer. So you have to know what you're looking for and then sort of go out and pick your fonts.
Well, I recently did one interview with Kimya Gandhi.
Right.
She works, as in she's a founder, I think, of
Mota Italic. Yeah, along with Rob Keller.
Yeah. So what is a font? I mean, then how and where are these sold? How are fonts used in the present day? Again, like a very basic question, because I'm targeting this particular episode to be more for a layman and not particularly for a design community, because design community have certain sense. Obviously, there are certain nuances which we'll discuss today, but like for a layman, what's a font like? And
I could go a bit deeper into this. I tend to use the word, and people in general tend to use the word font and typeface very interchangeably. And for most cases, it's perfectly fine. It's fine. You can use them interchangeably. And today, especially, there is a difference, but it's less so. Back in the day, font was the physical object, the thing cast in metal, and the typeface was the impression on the paper, the drawing and the design that came from that font. So today also, the outlines that you draw are the typeface. Like the design that is there in that font file is the typeface. But the font itself is a sort of packaging for what takes that typeface along. So the font file that you download, that's known as the font. Now that font file could contain regular, bold, italic, and all these different weights and styles just in one font file. It's still one font file with multiple typefaces in it, but you could also have multiple typefaces in multiple font files. So that's the duality.
So is it safe to say Helvetica is a font and Helvetica Condense Bold is a typeface?
Correct.
Okay. Cool. So, and what are the different types of licenses? I mean, why do you think, like, obviously this is going to be a longer conversation, why font should be licensed? But to begin with, what are the different types of licenses which one should be aware of at least?
So because fonts got dematerialized and now they're this intangible thing, they started getting used in different environments that sort of have evolved over time, and the kind of licenses to deal with those different environments have progressed. So for starters, these fonts were initially only used on computers and these systems and printing machines. So initially you had what was a print license, essentially, which is the basic license that most type foundries and is universally offered today. So you have a basic license which is usually used by graphic designers. It allows for 2 to 5 systems in most cases. This varies from type foundry to foundry. Then you have a web license, which is something that these fonts are uploaded on servers and they're used by web designers essentially. Now this license is not a perennial license, it's usually a timed license, and it is linked with the traffic of the website. So every time, like if the traffic on the website increases beyond a certain point, these are all defined in the clauses. Like all foundries have these define. If it goes beyond a certain amount, then that price changes. And then you have app licenses, which is embedded fonts in different kinds of mobile applications and stuff like that. So that has another kind of license. Then you have...
I think in that web also you have impression-based licenses, because like if your website has a particular like 50 million users per month or per day, then the number of impressions, the font will surface up as a thing. So that's also licensed differently, because I recently bought one. So
Right. So that's why it's based on the traffic your website gets.
Achha, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
You start off with a base number, and if that traffic goes beyond a certain amount, then it increases, the cost of that license increases.
Correct.
Then you have the app embedding license. You then also have other kinds of licenses where you can buy out the license, like we spoke initially, where let's say a company wants to, it's more feasible for them to customize, get a commissioned font for their company rather than buy so many licenses, because they have so many systems worldwide. So in that case, they'll get a custom license, and depending on various scenarios, they could either have a clause which allows them like a 5-year exclusivity right on that design, after which the foundry or the designer is free to sell that design, or they completely buy out the whole IP and that's theirs, and they can choose to do whatever they want to do with it. So roughly these are the various kinds of licenses. Different foundries, you go to their website, they have particular clauses for all of these things, and all of these things are always there in something known as the EULA. EULA is an acronym for End User License Agreement. It's a file that will come with every font that you've legally downloaded.
Correct.
And it defines all these permissions and restrictions of where you can use the file that you've downloaded right now.
And also these fonts are, I think, available at a size level also, for weight level as well, right? So if you want just a particular bold, and then the price reduces, you need not buy
you can buy single weights depending on where you're using it as well, which it's an easier amount to pay. You don't have to buy the whole family, especially if you're not going to use the whole family.
Correct. Especially I hate italics, so I don't ever buy.
Really?
Yeah. So can you briefly tell us also about these extension formats, Unicode, some like bits of, and also slightly elaborate on EULA, because that was my next question.
Okay. Let me start with Unicode. So Unicode is a character encoding format. It's not really directly related to fonts, but it's the reason fonts function everywhere and anywhere today. So what it does is it's given a specific number to, example, the letter A. And because of that number associated with that letter A, no matter where you type it, no matter where it appears. So if I type an email to you, you read the letter A because that same number is associated with
that Unicode.
Yeah, the Unicode value stays the same. So it's an industry standard now. So across operating systems, across the internet, the reason you can read exactly the same letter is because of the Unicode. And
so for example, if whatever, like 0441, that's the code, right?
Right.
So is that getting punched into the whatever, the interface, and that's why A appears, or how, like
it's encoded already. So when you type into any keyboard, if you're typing A, if the keyboard is a Latin keyboard, if you're typing the letter A, it already knows that this is the encoding for this letter and this is what's going to appear on your screen. That's how when you type it on your keyboard, that letter appears on the screen. Similarly, and this is not just for Latin, so the letter K in Devanagari, it has a particular encoding, and when you type that on the Devanagari keyboard, that appears there, and whenever that document goes to someone else, whether it's an email, whether it's a PDF document, whether it's an InDesign file, whatever it is, it'll replicate the exact same thing because that information is stored. It's already encoded within the font itself. So that's something that you design while designing the font itself. It's already it's a default encoding that's there now. So I mean, any font that comes out these days has to be Unicode compliant, because There's just no other way. Otherwise, people won't be able to use that font at all. Like on any system, it won't work.
So, but does that mean you need to download the font to have that, or Unicode is...
Unicode is there everywhere. Like your phone has Unicode. Like everything is Unicode compliant because it needs to be. There is no way around it.
So Mukta is a Unicode base. Correct. Now, if I across the world, if I open a file which is written using Mukt font,
right?
Even if I don't have that on my machine, it's fine.
Correct.
Okay.
So,
but if I have to edit, then I need.
Yeah, if you have to edit, then you need it. Usually, on like when I open a file that doesn't have the fonts on InDesign or Illustrator, it says these fonts are not available, and there's a temporary preview that appears. So even if that font is not there on the system, it'll revert to a default system font that's available. It might not be Mukta, it might be some other font for that script, whatever. Because there's a language marker as well. It knows that this is the script because there are different blocks assigned to different writing systems. So it knows that this number is associated with this writing system, and whatever system font is there for that supports that writing system, it'll fall back to that at least. Or if there's no font that supports that, then there's that tofu box, that square box, that the rectangular box that shows up. So that is the fallback. Then you know that this font is not available or this script is not supported, and you either download something that supports it, or you have to basically figure out a way to solve that. But that box indicates that you don't have a font to support the writing system over here.
Sure. And then what is, I don't know whether it's the right question, but then what is the difference between ASCII code and then Unicode?
ASCII used to be the encoding standard before Unicode. And what Unicode does is it allows a larger number of characters. So basically, imagine the number is much larger. I forget the exact amount. It's, I think, somewhere over 1 lakh or so of available slots. And all of these are assigned. There's a Unicode consortium that sort of you have to send a proposal to if you want to encode any character or any particular script and give a detailed proposal as to why do you think this is important and how this is significant, and they are the ones who will then take that proposal forward and add it to the Unicode block and assign it sort of spaces in the Unicode. So Devanagari has a space. Most Indian languages, the official Indian languages have different blocks in the Unicode that they're assigned to, and they sort of work because of that. And because of which the curve for Devanagari is encoded on a separate number, the curve for Malayalam is encoded in a separate number, and curve for Odia is encoded in a separate number. And all of them can appear in a document simultaneously because they're different letters encoded to different numbers.
Very interesting. I think it's just a lack of medium. Maybe we could have projected something and then displayed. But yeah. And any thoughts about the other things like formats, ELU, EU,
EULA.
Yeah, EULA.
EULA is, like I said, it's a licensed document. It's there in every file that you'll download.
No, but whose responsibility is to write in that? It's the foundries, or are there international standards which someone has to follow?
It is the foundry. It's whoever is retailing their design. So they will have demarcated all the use cases that this can be used for. And it usually dependent on the kind of license you've purchased from them. So,
but there will be some guiding principle as to you have to have these 4 bullet points at least, and those will be governed by some board somewhere. I don't know.
The EULA is it's designed by the foundries itself. So as far as I know, there is no board that governs it. Every foundry can come up with their own requirements, but there are sort of standards across the industry where a desktop license does this, and it's supposed to be for desktops only, and a web license will allow you usage on a server, and so on and so forth. Now within this, the number of desktops that are allowed might change from foundry to foundry, so this you have to check with them. Usually 2 is done because it allows for one system and one laptop that you're going to be working from. So, which is why 2 is at least there. It might go up to 5 depending on the foundry. Again, server licenses, the traffic values might change from foundry to foundry. So there are certain basic things in place, but then there are finer points that foundries are allowed to sort of decide for themselves.
And you were also saying about foundries are very easily accessible because they want to know in what context people are using, what are the problems they are facing. Because this was like a personal thing. I was trying to, I think I downloaded Calibre, BRE, from Klim Foundry. And the rupee symbol was not really a good glyph. And it was, I think, it was also slightly bigger than the number. So it was looking off.
Yes.
So first we tried to fix it on my own, like something on a glyph maker, but that was too scary. So we reached out to them and I think we got it resolved. So
I mean, type designers are people who want their fonts to be used. So they're going to try and find a solution that works for everybody involved. In this case, it was to resolve that particular glyph that you wanted. And that's another thing you can do. If you want a particular glyph that you think is not included in a design, you can reach out to them and ask them that, can you add this? And they might charge extra for it, but if they see the value in it for everybody, they might just say like, oh, this is a great idea, and also welcome responses for feedback on their designs as well. So this is a conversation type designers are very happy to have.
And what according to you are, I mean, this is like I'm concluding towards the last 2 questions which I have. So what are the reasons do you think people are not buying fonts legally? I mean, I can clearly see there's, at least in India, there's shortage of good regional fonts, good regional and local typefaces. So there is clearly like a huge demand, but like the supply is less. So in that case, people should value the fonts, right? So any insights you have spoken to other foundries, why do they think, I doubt that they are aware of it also, right? They're just being ignorant and downloading from unknown sources. So that's my observation.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Especially in India, I don't think. I think people are still trying to figure out as to why people aren't buying more regional fonts. I think that will change gradually because graphic design in India has sort of always had English-based text in it. Like any advertisement you go to see has even Hindi words written out in English. Look at Bollywood posters. All these Bollywood names, of all these movies, are always written in English as opposed to Hindi or regional languages tend to have more efforts put into it, but that usually ends up being done using lettering and all. In some cases, you've now started to see examples of typefaces being used to design those posters.
No, but in India, with Latin typefaces also, people just download left, right and center. So is it a cultural issue? Is it an attitude issue? Is it a knowledge issue?
I think it's a little bit of all of that. I think piracy is an issue worldwide, especially in terms of fonts, because
across domains.
Because primarily people don't have the awareness of it. The lack of education regarding the fact that you have to buy fonts, like that is something that doesn't cross people's mind. Just for starters, when I tell people that I design fonts, they're like, oh, that's also a job. Because they're everywhere and they're all around you, and you don't really realize that's something someone does and that's something that you have to buy and pay for, because it's just always been there everywhere, no matter what.
Sorry to interrupt, but so is this because machines have by default 10 fonts like Arial and whatever, Trebuchet? So you have those fonts, so you think, and they're implicit, so you think, boss, ye hai, to I can download more. So maybe when these computers started giving, or Microsoft Word started giving default fonts, at that time it was an empty slate, then people would have got sensitive to this?
Yeah, so those were inbuilt system fonts, but people basically wanted to find their different voices. They were bored of the basic fonts available on the system, which is why you have so many different typefaces out there to allow for those different voices to come out. And once people went online, they've found these fonts. Like if you ask somebody kahan se mila, they're going to be like, oh, we found this from the internet. And digital rights management for the font is non-existent essentially, because to duplicate a font file, all you have to do is copy and paste. You can duplicate that file. You can send it to anyone. There is nothing to sort of tether it to the foundry that it came from, to any of its sort of origin, so to say. You can still make out, because usually the naming of that font, will have the foundry name or some nomenclature is there that tells you where it's from. But it's fairly easy to duplicate these fonts. And I mean, it doesn't strike people that they're doing something wrong, or even worse, if they're doing it intentionally, then they're sort of jeopardizing the whole environment of being able to create more fonts, because you want people to be able to make more fonts. And the only way that's going to happen is if they get paid for the work that they've already done. So all of that will change. The environment that fonts are getting created for is changing. You have new formats coming up, something known as a variable font, which is a font file essentially that can store multiple font files in it. That's the simplest way I can explain it, because you can do a whole episode just on variable fonts. And as opposed to the drop-down menu that we were normally used to, so you have bold, italic, condensed and all. You have sliders over here. So you could essentially just slide across and pick whatever version that worked for your document that you're designing. So how do you license for something like this? Like, how many instances are available for you to pick and choose on that slider? And not just if there's one slider. There are multiple sliders, because usually there is slant kele one slider, there is weight has another slider, and there are variable axes that we've not even thought of that are possible. So how do you license something like this? So all of this is changing, and it's a very dynamic environment. And
at least right now, if you compare to the steel and the metal casting.
Correct.
Yeah. Cool. I have last two questions. So are there any ways for foundries to trace if the particular people have bought license? How do they discover like mera chori ho gaya?
It's by, I think a lot of it happens with the community only seeing something and saying, oh, this looks like that font, and it might go back to the author in some way, and then the designer of the font would have to see if it is viable to sit and figure out if they've sort of sourced this font legally or not, because that's another thing. How do you keep track of which company bought the font and which designed that piece of poster or whatever it is that has used that font, and how do you find out whether they've used it legally?
But is this because the foundries are not as heavily financed as image and graphic type industry? Because Shutterstock, Getty Images, they know if their image was downloaded illegally and was used because of some code in the image itself, the number of times the impression was seen on the web. So they must be having some sort of a automation or like machine learning part embedded in the thing itself. So are there talks happening around fonts which
I've heard of some people asking for this to be done with the font file as well. I'm not sure how feasible it is, and I'm sure I'm sure the reason it's not done already is because it's not the most easiest way to go about doing it. And it would just create a more of a hindrance in installing the font. I'm not entirely sure why this is not the case. It seems like it can be done, but I'm not entirely sure why it isn't done. But it's not done. Like you can't trace back who the source of the font or where it's come from. At least I've not heard of it been happening
Correct.
anytime right now. There are certain cases that are better documented where people have sort of infringed on the copyright or infringed on the license that they bought. In most cases, it gets solved amicably, and I think it gets resolved by the designer asking whoever has used the font illegally to just buy a license, and that solves the issue. But there are more, I think, public cases like, I think, Font Bureau, which is a font foundry, sued NBC because they'd used a bunch of typefaces. They'd bought licenses for, I think, just one desktop or the desktop license, and they were using it on multiple systems. So that was a copyright infringement because they didn't have licenses to use on multiple systems. And over there, it's a larger company, and going after them might be more feasible in the long run. But to do that for every small place that does it is impossible to do, because you look at the printers that you have. A lot of times people don't go to graphic designers. They will go to the printer bhaiya and ask them to design their visiting card or some small thing, and you don't know where they source their font files from. So this is another argument to be made for hiring good quality designers and graphic designers who know their stuff, who know their font licensing, who know how to use these things, because there is a technical aspect to it, but you also know all of these other things, and you're sort of covered. Your business is covered because they will do things legally. They will not use pirated fonts.
Yeah. Ethics is a different subject altogether in design. But so to conclude, since you also teach, are there any 3 bullet points for people to be more conscious about font, and any guidelines as to how a font should be used in terms of legalities?
Okay, I hope this talk doesn't scare people away from using fonts, because
but I would like them to be scared, because as I started off with Oliver Smith, it's scary, and I generally feel about it.
Like I said, that people who design the fonts want their fonts to be used. So if you like a font, write to them. If you find, especially if you're a student, if there are students hearing this, most foundries give a discounted rate to students. Some sort of a lot of foundries I know also offer free student licenses. So as long as they're students and they're using it only for student projects, you can use those fonts for free, which is an amazing offer to avail. So there are those available. If you want to just try out a font, a lot of foundries offer you trial fonts, which will not be the entire character set, but some basic letters so you can see how it looks and sort of try it out before purchasing it in its entirety. So there are all these different options available. There are newer licensing techniques. There's something known as future fonts, which is where you can invest in a font when it's in a very nascent stage. So a designer has this idea of this crazy design, and he or she doesn't know who's going to purchase it. So she or he puts out this basic design and tells you what all is going to come next. And it starts out with a very low price. So you invest at that point, and all future upgrades you get for free.
It's like a Kickstarter.
It's like a Kickstarter, but when they upgrade it in the future, the price will usually go up. But you get it for that base price because you believed in them right at the beginning. So there's that model. There's font subscription models where you can subscribe. There's Font Stand. Adobe Fonts is another different kind of subscription model, but you need to be subscribed to Creative Cloud for that. You have something called as Font of the Month Club, which is by this type designer called David Jonathan Ross. And you basically subscribe to his Font of the Month Club, and every month you get a typeface in your inbox, a completely brand new, well-designed typeface that you get. So there are all these different models. People are trying and experimenting and trying to figure out what works, because it's a very open space for people to do things in. And yeah, I mean, they're responding to what's out there. The possibilities are endless. Don't be afraid of licensing fonts. If you're interested in something and want to purchase it, make an effort. It's not as tedious as it sounds. There are rules and regulations in place, and you will know that, but don't let that daunt you. I mean, I know you're trying to scare them, but I also don't want them to be scared, because the legality aspect of it is important, but it's not as scary as it sounds.
No, I like the best example and the best playground out there, and not to be scared at all, is Google Fonts, which obviously will have a different AudioGAN session altogether. But yeah, Google Fonts, you have like, I don't know, maybe 500 plus fonts which are like well designed. They can
there is a certain level of quality that is there to it. Again, some some writing systems are better supported than others, even in India. Like Devanagari has far more options than something like Odia, which I think has one. So there is disparities like that as well. But of course, I mean, Google Fonts comes from a vested interest of them wanting to make the web searchable, because all those fonts are Unicode compliant. Whatever is like, if there's a website made using Google Fonts, which is their primary reason for creating open source fonts, it's all searchable text that sort of feeds into their system.
Cool.
So it's a vested interest over there. But again, it's a good fallback in case you want free, and here I'm putting it in quotes. It's not free, it's an open source font. And there will be a certain level of quality beyond which, if you'd want more finesse in the output, you'd have to pay for that.
That reminds me of a beautiful quote by Massimo Vignelli, and I would like to conclude with that. So I'll just first thank you for giving your time, and it was really fun talking to you.
Likewise, Kedar.
Yeah. So yeah, here goes Massimo Vignelli. You can say I love you in Helvetica, and you can say it with Helvetica Extra Light if you want it to be really fancy. Or you can say it with extra bold if it's really intensive and passionate. And it might just work.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher, or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.
These are busy times at Ocean State Job Lot with Christmas and winter upon us. And many of our customers know that they can get quality items at low prices, like men's and ladies' merino wool socks for $3.99. Official New England Patriots Championship t-shirts or licensed hats, $10 each. And Patriots hooded sweatshirts for $25. Our men's and ladies' Sherpa jackets are terrific for $15. And men's memory foam slippers are $10. Women's $8. It's a great week to shop at Ocean State Job Lot.